Rather have a can of old shoe polish, much less go on a 3 or 4 hour road trip with your grandma. Hi, welcome back to Conglomeration Cat. I hope everyone's doing okay. Meant to post a video last weekend, but with life's events and things happening, just really didn't allow me to find the free time to do it. So here I am now making up for lost time and still working on my coffee for my weekend. Anybody loved this show back in the 90s when Comedy Central aired this? I was literally obsessed with it. Crow was my favorite. Joel was my favorite. I did like a lot of stuff that Mike did, but I absolutely was obsessed with this show. I was part of the fan club, had all the newsletters that they would send monthly. I still have my old VHS copies that I recorded off Comedy Central back in the day when I had cable. I absolutely love this show. Kind of got a conglomeration, again, hence the channel, of a lot of my favorite things. I've got Mystery Science Theater 3000. I am a massive Salem's Lot fan from 1979. And today we are looking at this group. And don't get too excited. This is not the original Lunchbox. This is a reproduction that were left over from some of the KISS conventions, I guess, in the 90s, or some of them were from the 2000s. So it's not the original. If it was, it would have a yellow handle. But this is just a reproduction. Really nicely done. Really. I did have the original metal box when I was, back in the day. And you know how you wish later on in life you would have kept some of the stuff that you had when you were a child? Because if you're like me, if you like going on eBay and seeing how some of this goes up in value, it's quite staggering. You could practically pay off your car, or you could take care of a mortgage of a house. But this one's kind of cool. It didn't come with the thermos. It came with, I think, 4 shot glasses. Some other ones come with different little things. I think there's like a flask now that comes with some of these. They were very limited, but I guess some of them were left over from old KISS conventions. So I managed to find one on eBay and quite happy with it. Which leads me to my new video. It is called KISS Casablanca Cassettes. I've gone on YouTube a couple times and seen maybe a few people that actually have posted some of their KISS collections on cassette, but I have never seen anyone do a KISS original Casablanca print cassette collection. I do have one. It starts from the very first album up to Unmasked. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I got 18 original Casablanca prints. Now, for any KISS fans who still have these, or if you guys know anybody that have these actual prints, some will know that I think the original Casablanca cassette prints were printed in black on the actual cassette themselves. Then in the late 70s, they started to do a blue text, and I'll show you exactly what that is and what the comparisons are. I started collecting these when I joined eBay back in 2003, and I had a couple of them when I was really young because my family or my brother would send me anything from Double Platinum to Dynasty, which was, you know, the time that those came out, 1978, 1979, when KISS was really in their heyday. But again, when you're young, you don't think to keep those things. You don't really think that maybe later on these might be valuable. You either save them or they get lost on the wayside. Sometimes family garage sales occur, and sometimes those get slipped in with clothes and whatnot that you would normally sell at a yard sale or garage sale. So one day I just had this ambition to maybe go back, and things like eBay was fantastic. To be able to go and see if any of these were still available, or if anybody had them, if anybody held onto them. It took me about 10, 15 years to collect these cassettes. And I really had to do my homework. I went online and really looked up information, what to look out for, serial numbers. Condition was a big thing for me. I'm quite particular in that. I'm not too picky, but I do have an eye for details, so I really try to apply it to collecting. I've been told I was an archivist. I love collecting things. KISS was big for me in the early 70s. the mid late 70s, all throughout the 70s. I absolutely loved this band. Kind of lost touch after they took the makeup off and went in through all the reincarnations. I thought the reunion that they did for the 96-97 tour was very, very well pieced together. I think it was the right place, the right time. There didn't seem as much drama kind of circulating at the time, which, by the way, I don't know a lot about this farewell tour that they're doing. I don't know when the last one's going to be. I don't keep up on it because it seems like it's a lot more drama-induced, a lot more tension. I'm into KISS because I love the theatrics. To me, it was eye candy as a kid. You know, if you were my age in the 70s, you only had practically 3 channels on a TV. So if they came on something like 321 Contact or 2020 with Hugh Downs, that was huge because they weren't too accessible back then. You know, you didn't have the internet where everything was literally a click away. You had to wait for something to come on TV, or you had to wait for a new album to come out in the music store. So you had to really be patient and keep a lookout for TV guides, word of mouth. That was fun for me as a kid. Just seeing just the KISS logo enough was very creative. It was very, very artistic. I loved their music. When I was a kid, it was easy to understand. Wasn't too complicated. Really enjoyed them. I have a lot of KISS merchandise, but it's going to take probably another couple videos to be able to share that with you guys. But for now, I just want to stick with actually the actual cassette collection. They're not really valuable. I went online to see if there was any kind of value, any kind of cost of how much these things might be worth. They're really not worth much, actually. There's not like its own identity or its own collectible cubbyhole. To me, it was just fun. I think what was most fun for me was the hunt, the keep a lookout for, the 10-year journey of it was a lot of fun for me to do on the side. Didn't cost me that much. It's not like each cassette was like $30 or $40 and I wasted my whole bank account collecting these things. But they were fun for me. There was something really cool about the first pressings of the first editions of these cassettes. Polygram in the early 90s, I don't know if they bought out Casablanca, but there was a crossover where Casablanca, I think, went under and Polygram took over the contract or took over the rights. So there were reissues of cassettes in the 80s and the 90s by KISS, but in my mind, they didn't seem as artistic or creative. A lot of the text was missing on some of the J cards, meaning the actual tape labels. Just didn't seem as creative when they reissue these. So without further ado, these are in chronological order. I'm not going to go over a lot of KISStory, as KISS fans would say. I just want to basically show off the actual cassettes themselves because, like I said, I don't really see a lot of people online doing this, so I thought it'd be fun to kind of start that. The first one is literally the self-titled album. And the reason that I started to collect these is that it's really intriguing back in the 70s that they actually had to put stereo cassette on their labels. Really kind of interesting. I don't know if that was Casablanca's thing, but I thought, wow, this is really primitive stuff. This is from 1974. This is the original. And I was doing my homework too and realizing that most of these Casablanca cassettes, for the most part of these tape labels, were done in white, and then the album cover or the actual picture of the album cover was mainly up on the top. Now when I say blueprint on these cassettes, because there was blue and black, I find that the blueprint of these are much, much harder to find. There's just not a lot of them made. I think they maybe made them for about a year as like a reissue. I wouldn't say like a reissue, but kind of like a second edition, even though they were still the original. But most of these, when they first came out, were an actual black print on the cassette themselves. I'm extremely happy and extremely, I don't know the right word. There's just something about the way that these came out that are really just basic. They don't sound that great. It's not like they have great dynamics or great warmth. It's just, You could tell that they were not really done as good as they probably could have sounded too. But there's something about the look of them. I'm really happy with how I found these because a lot of the time these kind of cassettes, especially this year in 74, 75, a lot of these just get faded. A lot of them just get a lot of use, a lot of handling, sometimes temperature extremes. People weren't always careful with what they had. I'm very happy to still have the lettering intact on these tapes. Very, very happy with that. What I would also do is that if I ever got one from eBay and if it looked a little rough, I would literally get 409 and a couple Q-tips. And just to show you an example, I would go around the parameter of the body of the cassette, like the lines here. See where I've got my finger? I would literally take a little bit of 409, spray it on the tip of the Q-tip, and just rub the Q-tip up and down in the crevices of the cassette to get any kind of discoloration out, any corrosion, any dirt. I would also check the pads, meaning that the pad here that you see that's white, when these don't engage in a lot of cassette decks, if that pad is missing, you're not going to get the complete volume or the complete frequency of the tape going across the head because it needs that pad to be able to read across the head. If you don't, it's just a little piece of copper, and the sound is extremely muffled if that pad is missing. To give you an example, this is what it would sound like. So it's really crucial that you get the padding intact. If not, I suggest not having coffee or Red Bull or whatever it is that is caffeinated. To be able to get tweezers, take the leader tape out very slowly and get a hot glue gun and make double sure that you're just doing one single drop between the copper and the padding, and you can stick that pad right back on there. But it's very tedious, very careful detail to be able to do that. If not, the hot glue gun gets everywhere, it gets on the tape. It could be a mess if you're not patient. So luckily with most of these cassettes that I'm showing today, I didn't have to do a lot of that. There was maybe 2 or 3 out of 17 or 18 that I collected that I actually had to do that process. But I just took my time. I took it very slow. So it made them look as much as restored or as new as possible looking. The second one is Hotter Than Hell. Leave in the comments what your favorite KISS album is. If you have any KISS cassettes or albums, CDs. Just kind of curious because they had quite the journey. They had quite the merchandising, quite the catalog. So this one's from 1974. I apologize if the cassettes themselves make a lot of noise on this computer because a lot of detail gets picked up through the mic on this computer. This one's even harder to find than the second one. Again, I'm really happy with how a lot of these were in my direction. I didn't have to do a lot of cleanup. Whoever had these or whoever I bought them from back from eBay took very, very good care of them. Like I said, most of them you find now are pretty thrashed. They're just, I don't think it's so much abuse. It's just back in the day, people didn't really collect. People used things and they used them over and over. And of course, if you had families, if you had children, that was one thing to assess too, that they didn't always last. So I'm really happy with how these prints still stayed intact. Another thing too to keep in mind is that if you're cleaning cassettes or if you're wanting to kind of restore and get some of the discoloration out from the edges, make sure that you do not use nail polish remover. I have learned that the hard way. Because if you do, and if you get too close to the lettering or some of the actual text on the tape, it'll just take it right off. And there's no rewind button on that. You cannot turn back time and put the text back in. 409, you kind of have to be careful as well. But I kind of mainly clean the windows. I clean the indentations. And like I said, luckily most of these I didn't have to clean up. They just came in this condition. Somebody really took pride and care of what they owned at one point. Third one is going to be Dressed to Kill. These first 3, or I should say first 4 albums, are very, very difficult to find on eBay now. I don't know if people are starting to collect them now, or just the simple fact that they just no longer exist in a lot of people's collections just because they are 40 to 50 years ago, which is really hard to imagine. But once again, I am extremely fortunate to find really good, clean copies of these guys. And they do play well. It isn't not, it isn't like grabbing a tape and then the first 2 or 3 minutes of a tape, it sounds very, very wrinkled and it's muffled. The frequencies drop in and drop out just because they've been used. No, I've been very fortunate. Like the very first song, the very first note of a song comes in crystal clear. Like I said, they are not perfect. A lot of cassettes back then didn't have the dynamics. They didn't have the warmth. They didn't have the real right delivery like, say, vinyl. But they do play quite well if taken care of. Next one is quite the biggie. This one's alive. Everyone knows that this is what really kind of saved the group. I'm extremely happy with this one because it's the original casing. Let's do it that way. There we go. A lot of Casablanca casings, or just cassettes themselves, didn't have a lot of these back in the day. Which, by the way, I'll go and disclaim that most of these cases that I got from eBay were either cracked, chipped. So I took the careful time to go online and do replacement cases. Because I really wanted to make sure that everything was clean. Everything was, I wouldn't say mint condition, but it is presentable. So it didn't take me long to replace cases. This is back in the day where they didn't make two cassettes. If you had like a double album, they actually had them called double play. So that was kind of fascinating. It's just all on one cassette. Now this is the original. This is not a blueprint pressing. This is a actual black pressing from the original year. So this is 1974. It's even got the serial number stamped on the casing, which I thought was really cool. Once again, all the pads are intact, which is very rare for a 40 to 50-year-old cassette. You have to find other pads from other cassettes and just transfer them over. Again, all the lettering's intact. I really made absolute sure that I looked for probably the best quality, and it took 10 years to be able to do it because I wasn't going to settle for less, and I don't have the careful hand to get a pen and kind of touch up stuff. If it's there, and I'll grab it. If not, then I just pass it up. These were back in the day, too, when Casablanca and other cassette companies were starting to kind of print stuff inside the actual J cards. So this is kind of cool. It's kind of like a special offer to receive your 8-page collector's cover booklet, which they had for the vinyl version of Alive. Apparently, if you could only do the cassette and if you didn't have a record player, you can send in $1 to Casablanca Records in Los Angeles to receive that actual booklet, which was like a whole bunch of photographs. I guess there were some signatures, some letters that came with it from the original Alive album. So that was pretty cool. I got a second pressing of the Alive, and it's the blueprint. The font's a little bit larger on this one. And this is in the blueprint. Same kind of double play. Again, I'm really, really happy that the text is still intact on these tapes. That's just unheard of. Again, just having them come in and out of cassette players just kind of rubs off the lettering. Poor storage, temperature extremes, on and on. All this stuff just kind of wears off in time. Same thing as kind of the first pressing, just maybe slightly different placement. I find it interesting that there's a white leader on this one. A lot of cassette leaders back in the 70s going into the 80s were either pink or blue. And every so often you just kind of get an oddball. Next one's going to be Destroyer. I find this one interesting because the stereo cassette down here is in a smaller condensed print. Not quite sure why, it's just something that my eye caught. But again, this is probably the second pressing because I got the blueprint. Which again, these blueprints are really hard to find. I think they only did like a 1-year run back in 1978, and I don't think they did anything after that. They went back to the black print. Again, white leader. And these still play. They really do. I don't play them all that often. It's not like I play them consistently or consecutively. I pull them out when I need a Kiss fix, and then I file them away, make sure they're in proper storage, proper temperature. Here's Rock and Roll Over. Again, they got that kind of lowercase stereo cassette print. I love this album. The very first Kiss song I ever heard when I was 6 years old was Calling Dr. Love, and I was 6 back then. And I absolutely love the riff. I love the melody. Gene Simmons has such character and such personality in his vocals. I absolutely love this because you gotta resign yourself to the fact that I grew up with James Taylor, Gordon Lightfoot, Simon and Garfunkel, which I absolutely adore. And then to have this come out of left field, it was like, whoa, what's that? That's heavy. That's intense. And I like it. Definitely grew up around a very eclectic family of musical tastes. This is the blueprint as well. Again, it's just kind of staggering at the nice condition that these things came in. Face it, most people don't like cassettes. They just don't. They easily get tangled. They easily get eaten up. And the reason for that mainly being, considering that I grew up with analog equipment, it's not so much the cassettes that do that. It's what kind of equipment are you using? Are you using a high-end cassette deck? Are you using a low-end cassette deck? If you are using a high-quality deck, you would think that you would have the common decency to keep up the maintenance, meaning that you would clean the heads, you would clean the pinch rollers of the cassette, you would clean the cap stand from tape oxide, because tape oxide will rub off and leave residue on the heads and on the cap stands. If those aren't cleaned periodically, it just builds an extra layer that the pinch roller can only take so much, and if there's too much tension, that's when there's tape snags, and that's when things get tangled. And people back then didn't have the patience or the mentality to think, why is that happening? Instead, it gets eaten up and it gets tossed in the garbage. So a lot of it was just not enough thought. I don't think they had enough people around or asked enough questions as to why these things kept happening. So cassettes always get a bad rap because of that. There are other things as well, but just growing up with my father and him kind of almost kind of dissecting, almost like a scientist, of why these things were happening. He would take little flashlights and go into the spot of like tape decks to see what was causing what we call tape eatage, like why tapes were getting tangled and why they were getting pulled out from the casing and all those things. It was like, why is it doing that? It shouldn't be doing that. So it was a lot of trying to figure out why these things were doing that. My favorite Kiss album, Love Gun. I love Eddie Kramer's production on this. Eddie Kramer, of course, was a big engineer, record producer for Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, many others. This has such a great sound. This is a real in-your-face album. And Casablanca, once again, goes back to the stereo cassette font that they used to use. And I really, really like this one. This one's a very hard one to find in good condition. People wore this one out. Again, in the blue text. Really happy with how this one looks. Didn't have to clean this one up at all. Still intact. And as the years went by in the 70s, Casablanca got a little bit more elaborate with their packaging, so they started to list the song titles on the back of the J cards, the running time, just a little bit more thought out, which was kind of cool, because when you were younger, again, no internet, no access to a lot of things. It forced you to read. This was information that you really wanted to find out what it was about, how long songs went, who wrote them. So you had a lot more homework to do, which I thought was really fun when I was a kid. These two came together, but they didn't literally come together as one casing, but it is a Live 1 and a Live 2. Actually, it's a Live 2, but it's Volume 1, Volume 2. And Casablanca did kind of a clever thing. I don't know if it was real marketing on their end, but When it came together back in the day, they started to do this, which I thought was interesting. It came like that, and yes, while volume 2 is upside down, that's how the casing was. Sometimes the casing wouldn't even part, like you couldn't have one separately. It was just one casing kind of glued together, and it would look like that. So when you open them up, one would open up on one side, the other one would open up on the other side. I mean, you pretty much get the idea. Again, blueprint. This one's interesting because you can tell someone at the factory accidentally swapped the tape inside, meaning that if you see Calling Dr. Love, you turn it over and you get Detroit Rock City. Well, somebody at the factory didn't proof something and it slipped through by accident. Calling Dr. Love, which starts this side, actually plays on this side, and Detroit Rock City plays on the other side. So the tape was swapped. There were a few tapes that kind of got away without proof, and that's doesn't annoy me. I just think it's funny because it's like, whoops, we put the tape in the other way and put the casing in without proofing and putting the titles where they should be. I always thought that was kind of funny. I got a couple tapes like that where just, hey, you know, human error. Next ones are going to be double platinum, which are very similar to the casing as a Live 2. Same kind of design. It would be like that. I think later pressings, they finally got smart and realized, well, that may not be the conventional way to do it. So I got 1 and 2. These are really good compilations. They're just basic. It's like a greatest hits package. Again, very happy with how these cleaned up. I did have to clean the double platinums up quite a bit because they sure get a lot of usage. Wasn't ruined. It wasn't damaged. Everything was still intact, but it was definitely yellowed out. You can tell that there were a lot of fingerprints, just a lot of usage. So there was quite a few Q-tips and 409 going on to be able to get these somewhat in fairly good condition. Really cool. Some of the songs on these, I guess, were remixed. Like Strutter 78 was completely reconstructed from the first album. So when they did Strutter, they did like, I wouldn't say like a disco, kind of like a rock disco version, but it was definitely different. But really cool stuff. Double platinum on cassette is not all that great on Casablanca. I think the EQ was off. There is way too much high end. So when it comes to syllables like S or street, it's very scratchy. Not a lot of low end on these. It wasn't until later on when they did the reissues that I think they went back and finally fixed the EQ a little bit. Fixed actual equalization and kind of balance things out a little bit more. I think things were peaked way too high. We're going to get into the solo albums. This is a fun album. Either you like it or you don't, or you think, oh, it's kind of egotistical. I think Gene Simmons is really getting into his inner child here. He's got some really funny compositions, everything from Walt Disney to kind of some Beatlesque arrangements. He's got Cher on here. It's pretty intriguing. I don't listen to it a lot, but when I do, I find myself just being fascinated with it because there's a lot of sides to him. And it's an interesting package because you get the title here, but you get this side here. So when you try to read the label, most of the time, this would be the other way instead of upside down. So later pressings actually fix that. But when you get it, when you look at the jacket, you're like, oh, wait. Is that intentional, or did they just do that by accident at the pressing plant? But I found that interesting. Once again, the original casing, I didn't have to replace that. That's the actual sticker with the serial number and the record label stamp logo. And I don't think they did this too long, but Casablanca was starting to do paper labels. Why? I'm not quite sure. Most of these get bubbled up in time, meaning that if any heat gets to it, it starts bubbling and coming up from the actual cassette. There was at one time where you can just press your thumb down without crimping it, and you can just kind of even it out a little bit. Sometimes that worked, but age has no limit on it. It doesn't have any kind of personality other than it's just going to do what it's going to do to certain materials. But it's not too bad. It's in fairly good condition. This thing plays beautifully. This has a really good sound to it, considering most cassettes are just kind of flat. This has a really good dynamic range. So I don't know if it was like the very first pressing and the rest of them just kind of started to wean off a little bit. I love this album. My gosh, Ace was always my favorite of Kiss. I like the other ones a lot, and with the four of them, obviously there was immense chemistry and complete magic when they were all together. I liked Ace a lot. I loved his makeup. I loved his guitars. I loved his costumes, his demeanor. He didn't seem to be as slashy as the others. And being kind of a shy, introverted kid, I really went for his charisma as a kid. I truly love this album because before that he did Shock Me off of Love Gun. And it was the first time that he actually sang lead vocals, and he was terrified. He was very shy and very, he was just not confident at that point. So it was to be said that I guess there were tensions with, within the group. There was a lot of resentment. They were tired. I mean, this was a band that was kind of like the Beatles of the 70s. I mean, they were just constantly touring. The merchandise was just out of control, and it was just this constant merry-go-round that never seemed to stop for them. So I don't know whose idea it was, but it was an idea that they're just going to go separate ways. They're going to make solo albums. They actually dedicated their albums to each other. And there's so many opinions. There's just like this huge swimming pool of opinions of all their solo albums. I like all of them. I don't play one more than the other, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would be Ace, because I always imagined him as kind of like the kid, kind of in the back of the classroom, didn't really raise his hand, didn't really speak. And I always had this analogy that when it came to making his solo album, it was kind of like it was his first time up to bat. And you can just kind of imagine this crazy scenario where he's up to bat and you see all the outfielders kind of move in. Like everyone's like, move in, move in. He's not going to hit a home run. He's not going to, he's not going to hit this one out of the park. All right, everyone just kind of move in. Then when he does, it's kind of like the very first pitch that he receives, he just nails it. He just hits it out of the park. And it leaves everybody just kind of watching the ball fly over their head. There is so much confidence and so much energy into this. And it does help to have Eddie Kramer as your producer, because Eddie Kramer not only had an ear, but he had a wonderful way of giving people confidence and giving people encouragement to do simply their best. Or he would find something in somebody and really bring it out. And I think that's what he did with Ace. He really brought a lot of his strengths. He brought a lot of his confidence out. And you can hear in Ace's vocal. I've never heard Ace sing like this until I heard this album. It was just shocking. Because when you hear Gene Simmons, you go, that's Gene. When you hear Paul Stanley, you hear it's Paul. And granted, they both have incredible voices. Paul Stanley has a range that is just insanely incredible. But Ace, for the first time, finally gets his turn up the bat, and he just knocks it out of the park. I absolutely love the energy of this album. Even if you're not a Kiss fan, if you just like straight-ahead rock and roll, get it. Snowblind is probably my favorite song off this. What's on Your Mind is great. Ozone. Just really great rock and roll. That probably took 15 minutes of me just describing it, but I had to really put him on the pedestal for that. They're going back to the black print now. They are not going to do the actual blueprints anymore. I think, like I said, I think it was a year that they did that run, and not many were actually pressed. But they're going back to the black labeling now. Again, this one gets a lot of attention from me. If I want to put in a Kiss solo album, I'm really, that ranks number one for me, big time. This is kind of cool. They're kind of starting to do this now where it's the Kiss Army fan club, a lot of the solo stuff. So whatever you couldn't get on vinyl, which vinyl you normally got stickers, you got posters, you got quite a collection of really cool stuff. Obviously cassettes you couldn't fit it into here. But the Kiss Army fan club was huge, and I thought it was cool that they could actually put this in and people could still get the posters or, you know, like the mail info. Kind of cool that they did this. See the exciting special offer on the reverse side, which was what I just showed you. But it's really cool. You can tell Casablanca really put in some time to be able to do this and get this out to the fans. Cassettes in the 80s and 90s, they just, I don't know if they stopped carrying, it wasn't as much in demand. This just didn't seem like they put a lot of time and effort into it. We got Peter Criss's. A lot of people don't like this one. I can go either way. It just shows that he has another side to him, and it's a side that I think were his humble beginnings as far as rock and roll goes. This one is not too hard to find, but I find this one very interesting. It actually has screws on the casing. Most commercial cassettes back then did not have that because I think people didn't want other tapes being put inside and then resold, you know, copyright issues. But it's the very first time that I saw a Casablanca cassette that actually has screws where you can take it out if something gets loose or if a tape gets tangled. It's the main reason why people threw cassettes away, because you couldn't open them. You would have to get like a penknife, which is what my dad did. He'd get a penknife and get like an opening and just carefully open it, and you would hear a click, and you know, most of the time he got lucky. Sometimes he wouldn't, and then some of the pieces would break off. And you had no choice but to throw them out. But I found that very unusual. If all cassettes were like that, I don't think they would be tossed out as much, because at least there was an option or there was an avenue for you to be able to repair it if you had, you know, the skill or the right people to walk you through it. Paul Stanley's first solo album as well. I kind of like the print, you know, back in the 80s and 90s when they reissued it, it was just Kiss Paul Stanley, and it was just a little bit of information for copyright, and then that was it. But, you know, you really had to kind of cram a lot between the spacing and down here of the photo. Like I said, these aren't really valuable. It's not like they have, you know, any kind of collector's value. It's just, they're just fun to have. Again, we got the paper label. This one definitely has seen its share, but it still plays beautifully. Plays fantastic. But that's just a perfect example of weather, temperature extremes. Probably some heat got to it. A lot of people back in the day, when they had cars, they actually had cassette decks in their cars. So, granted, what time of the year it was, it probably got left out, or it got left in the car too long. So the paper would start to bubble. Not much you can really do about it. Didn't have to clean that one up as much. And then we got Dynasty, which I've had since second grade, believe it or not. I actually kept this one in very, very good condition. I kept all my things in kind of tedious, tidy condition. I was taught to definitely put things away when I was done, wash my hands. It wasn't an obsession, or it wasn't, you know, anything too tedious. It was just, I just learned early on to take care of what I owned. I remember this coming out when I was in second grade. This was huge when it came out because I Was Made for Loving You. At the time, I was just happy to hear a Kiss song. It wasn't until later on that it was like rock disco and went back to their earlier stuff and went, oh yeah, they definitely have changed. They definitely have taken turns just to kind of keep up with the trends and the formula. And this is on the black print. Not much to really show off on that, but this is the original. This is literally from 1979. Got the song listings, the compositions. Pretty cool. Now the last one that I got in the stack is going to be Unmasked. This one's a little bit harder to find because when Casablanca was either bought out or went under and Polygram came out, they reissued this, and this down here was actually in black. And they kept the stereo cassette font, which I thought was interesting. But it's really hard to find the original pressing of this. This is from 1980. And I'm really happy to find this one. This one took about almost a year to find on eBay because it's not very common. It may be now. I haven't gone back on in a while to see if any of these really do pop up. But I was really happy to find this one. It's not their best album. You can tell things are starting to change. You know, the band's getting a little bit tired. But it's just really cool to still have all these intact. They still play wonderfully. So that is my KISS collection, Casablanca Originals. Like I said, don't know if they're any value. They're just fun to collect. I love doing stuff like that. Every job that I've ever had, every job I ever went to, I always loved what I did. I love the job description. I can do it until the day I'm gone. I'm all about atmosphere. I'm all about morale in a work environment, and a lot of places I've been to lately have been really weak in that department. Don't know if it's COVID, post-COVID. It's just the way life is. So when I come home, I really do try to immerse myself into collecting, into getting into hobbies, because I think it's very important. You need to have a balance in life. You can't just work, work, work and not have any outlet or any kind of distraction you can really get into. Doesn't matter what it is. I just always promised myself that I would put in over 120% at work and then over 150% in my personal life and in my hobbies and in my collecting. So this has been a lot of fun for me to do. It's probably my longest video. I apologize if it's long, but then again, I don't. I'm just having fun. If you guys like and subscribe, that would be fantastic. If you guys got any questions about any of these tapes, or if you want to start collecting yourself, feel free to reach out. I'll be more than glad to kind of guide you in the right direction. I have got some stuff coming up in October that won't allow me to do a lot of videos, but I will be able to explain that and give a little bit more clarity as we go along. But in the meantime, I hope everyone's having a fantastic weekend. And I will talk to you guys soon. And please remember to be constructive, not destructive. Take care, guys.